When it comes to people, we are all capable of making good and bad choices, but the choices these folks made impacted so many people that their actions are now reflected in history as tragic as well as horrifying. Hi, my name is Jessa, and we're going to look at the top 10 terrifying criminals that shook the world. Number 10. Amelia Dyer. Proving one of the Victorian era's most infamous criminals, Amelia Dyer could be one of the most prolific serial killers in human history. Back in Victorian England, people were paid for adopting babies in a practice known as baby farming. Amelia Dyer turned this into her profession and adopted numerous children. She began by keeping them all for a time until they passed of natural causes, but ultimately turned to disposing them shortly after adopting them. Thereby keeping the money without having to actually raise them. One of the Dyer's victims was found floating in a river Thames on March 30th, 1896, leading to her arrest and eventually execution. While 6 of the victims may have been confirmed, it's believed that Dyer may have killed up 400 individuals throughout her life. In one of the most sensational trials of the Victorian period, she was found guilty and later hung. Number 9. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, which is a name he prides himself like the egomaniac he is. Richard Smells Bad Ramirez was a serial killer and had violated many women by breaking into their homes. Apparently, when he was young, he had a cousin who showed him adult images and had a knack of harming women. Because of this, Richard became heavily influenced in a life of crime early on and continued to pursue said crime into adulthood. Ramirez's victims ranged in age, gender, and background, and his attacks were often pretty random, and the brutality of his crimes contributed to the sense of fear and panic within the community. He was also really into scaring people with Satanism. Ramirez was known for incorporating satanic imagery into his crime, as he left occult symbols at crime scenes and sometimes forced victims to swear allegiance to Satan. I don't know, it was his thing. Ramirez was captured in 1985 after being identified by residents in the east of Los Angeles, and he was convicted up to 13 counts of death, 5 counts of attempted killings, 11 physical violations, and 14 burglaries. The trial attracted significant widespread media attention, and Richard Ramirez died on June 7, 2013 while still on death row at San Quentin State Prison. His death was attributed to complications related to B-cell lymphoma. Number 8. Aileen Wuronos. Aileen Wuronos was a convicted serial killer as she targeted only men as an adult worker. She had up to 7 victims and would target specifically motorists, men who would meet her on the road as she acted as a hitchhiker. She was incarcerated at the Florida Department of Corrections BCI death row for women, and she tried to appeal to the US Supreme Court, which was later denied. At that point, she dismissed her legal counsel, terminated all pending appeals. She then would go off to say, "I killed those men, I robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system." And she also mentioned, "I'm so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and I would kill again." After extreme mistreatment she suffered while imprisoned and the inhumane management given to her by her officers, in her final interview she expressed to the media, and quote, "You did sabotage me, society, and the cops and the system. An attacked woman got executed and was used for books and movies and so on." And her final on-camera words were, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass." She was later executed by lethal injection. Number 7. Basil Zaharoff. When it comes to a good salesman, from what I've heard from friends who used to do door-to-door or retail, require commissions, they would always tell me about having a human connection. As for Basil Zaharoff, he was viewed as a master of bribery and corruption. Considered as the master of Europe, you're looking at the most important people of the time when it comes to influencing political scenes in Europe with his armed deals. On both sides, he would sell weapons where he dubbed Merchant of Death, and he didn't care which side he was selling to, just as long as he was selling. After all, considering the current times, war is a business, not even at the expenses of civilians or human life as a whole. To men like Basil, they only care about money. Even today, despite his transactions, they remain a mystery as he took up 2 days burning as much evidence as possible. After the First World War, he wanted more money and focused on the conflicts in Greece, where he single-handedly convinced both parties between Venizelos and King Constantine to use his weapons against each other. He was basically playing Sims, but in real life. In the end, his life was shaped by seizing opportunity wherever he could find fit, and through his self-serving business dealings, he helped shape the power dynamics in Europe and thus played an instrumental part in the history of the continent. Number 6. Ted Bundy. Speaking of mommy issues, when it comes to Ted Bundy, his victims' majority seem to look like his mom. Women with long dark hair, and although he had different types of victims as well, primarily had these traits. The exact number of Ted Bundy's victims are unknown, but estimate ranges from between 30 to over 100. His crimes occurred across several states, including Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. Bundy was apprehended multiple times but managed to escape twice in custody. His first escape occurred in Aspen, Colorado in 1977, and his second escape took place in December 1979 1977 from a Colorado jail. During these escapees, he committed additional deaths. In 1979, Bundy was convicted of numerous charges, including these deaths, kidnappings, and burglary. He received death sentences for his crimes despite multiple appeals and efforts to delay his execution. Bundy was eventually executed in the electric chair on January 24, 1989 at Florida State Prison. A lot of people know that it wasn't that Ted was charming. He wasn't. He was just good at manipulating people by the means of using tactics of helplessness. A down on his luck sort of guy who needed help. Using this tactic multiple times is what lured his victims who wanted to genuinely help him. Even now, kidnappings and abductions that still happen today use the same tactics, leaving something on your car or tagging you while you're out for groceries. So by any means, if you feel like something's off, just trust your gut, and especially if you're alone. Number 5, Natalia Guerra. Speaking of religious cults, which I'm gonna speak about it now, Natalia Guerra was definitely part of one, which she had sacrificed her 2-day infant by burning him to death as part of a satanic ritual. A lot of Satanisms when it comes to crime. She was also finally apprehended by police after evading capture for 2 years, and just after 2 days of giving birth, Natalia agreed to have baby Jesus killed after the leader of the Antares de la Luz cult and father of the child, Raymond Gustavo Castillo Gaete, declared the infant to be the Antichrist and that the sacrifice would help prevent the end of the world on December 21, 2012. Natalia had previously stated in her defense that she was drugged at the time of the death, but a forensic psychologist declared the members were not under the influence when the sacrifice was carried out. After her sentence, Natalia managed to flee and was on the run for 2 years. Investigators noted that she had lived in different houses and even changed her identity in order to evade capture. The police also noted that after being apprehended, she did not show any remorse whatsoever and claimed that she was manipulated by the cult and was therefore innocent. Number 4, Andrei Chikatilo. Chikatilo was also known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Red Ripper, as a Soviet serial killer who committed series of gruesome killings and mutilations in the Soviet Union between 1978 and 1990. Chikatilo was convicted of 53 deaths, although the actual number of his victims may actually be higher. Chikatilo's killing spree began in the 1970s, targeting mostly young women and young adolescents. He lured victims to secluded areas where he would physically harm, mutilate, and then kill them. His signature was often biting and mutilating his victims' bodies. Freaking weirdo. The investigation into the series of deaths was challenging for the Soviet authorities as they faced pressure to solve the case quickly. Chikatilo managed to evade suspicion for several years, and he was finally arrested in 1990 after being observed acting suspiciously near a train station in Rostov. Andrei Chikatilo was executed by firing squad on February 14, 1994. Number 3, Jane Wayne Gacy. Just like Andrei, send in the clowns. Just not Jane Wayne Gacy, who had a thing for dressing up as a clown, specifically known as Pogo the Clown. Gacy had a criminal record that included convictions of physically harming and attempted assault of young boys in the 1960s. Despite these convictions, he was able to build a relatively successful contracting business and maintain a facade of normalcy. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy physically violated and killed at least 33 teenage boys and young men, and he often lured his victims with promises of work for money, or work or money. At his homes, Gacy would use various methods including strangulations or suffocations to kill his victims. Many of Gacy's victims were buried in a crawl space beneath his house. As the numbers of victims increased, he began disposing the bodies in the Des Plaines River. The sheer scale of his crimes and the graphic nature of the evidence shocked law enforcement greatly, and Gacy went to trial in 1980 and was convicted of the 33 kills. He was sentenced to death, and during the trials, Gacy's defense unsuccessfully attempted to argue that he was just insane, but he was fully sane when he committed the crimes. Jane Wayne Gacy spent 14 years on death row before he was executed by lethal injection. Number 2, Jeffery Dahmer. We gotta mention Jeffrey, as his crimes were not only disgusting and horrifying, but it for sure shook the world at how the system failed the victims he took advantage of. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and offender who killed and dismembered 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer's crimes included acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. As an example, one of the victims the system failed to protect from Dahmer included Kony, a 14-year-old Laotian boy who lived near Dahmer. The night of his crime, Kony was actually able to escape Dahmer and had 2 black women, Sandra Smith and Nicole Childress, comfort him, but because they didn't know what to do with the situation, since Kony couldn't speak English or be able to speak in general, they had to call the police. As a result, when the police came, so did Jeffrey. Jeffrey told the police that the 14-year-old was a friend of his, even though he was a grown-ass adult, and had a drinking problem. But the 2 women were adamant and implored to the police to just check on the boy as he was bleeding out of his rear end. Instead of checking Jeffrey's ID, which could have flagged his previous charges for child harm, they instead threatened the 2 women for arrest. And once again, the system failed, and Kony was never seen alive again. Dahmer, with the blood of 17 men and boys on his hand, had a racist imagination. More than half of his victims were black, and all but 3 were not white, casting Kony as a scene of racialized and homoerotic violence that police are simply too unfit to notice, and too in service to not be complicit in. And finally, number 1, Joseph Kony. Joseph Kony is the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, a rebel group that originated in Uganda. The LRA is notorious for its brutal tactics, including abducting young people and forcing them to become young soldiers. Joseph Kony gained international attention due to the widespread atrocities committed by the LRA, especially against these young individuals, and efforts have been made to bring him to justice. The Lord's Resistance Army was formed in northern Uganda in the late 1980s. Joseph Kony emerged as the leader of the group, which initially claimed to fight against the Ugandan government, but later expanded its operations to neighboring countries. The LRA became known for its brutal tactics, including the abduction of these young people to serve as soldiers and, sadly, intimate slaves, if you know what I mean. The young individuals were often subjugated to physical and psychological harm, and the LRA was responsible for widespread displacement and violence in the region. In 2005, the International Criminal Court, aka the ICC, issued arrest warrants for Joseph Kony and the other LRA leaders, charging them with crimes against humanity and war crimes in general. Kony remains at large, actually, and efforts to apprehend him have faced significant challenges. While the intensity of the LRA's violence has decreased over the years, Joseph Kony remains a fugitive, and the group has continued to engage in sporadic violence and abduction. The situation has posed ongoing challenges for humanitarian efforts and regional stability. Joseph Kony's actions and the activities of the Lord's Resistance Army has severe and long-lasting consequences for the affected communities in Central Africa. The efforts to address the impact of the LRA to bring Kony to justice have involved combinations of regional initiatives, international cooperations, and advocacy efforts. Well, a lot of bad choices were made by these folks, and some a bit more widely disgusting than others, but there are still crimes nonetheless. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe. Don't do crime. Just don't do it. Anyways, bye.